Hello, and welcome to another Profiles of Endurance. I'm Father Scott Vanderveer. Growing up involves challenges for all of us, but today's guest has experienced some challenges that most of us don't expect to face until we are much older. Jeremy Tenenbaum is an only child who experienced very big health challenges for both of his parents. While both of them started their family a little bit later in life, there was no way for them to know that the challenges that usually come in people's 70s and 80s and 90s would approach their household at a much earlier time. Jeremy is here to talk with us about how to face health challenges and confusing and unfair situations in our lives by taking a look at what his experience has been of some extreme health challenges that have pushed him to the brink. Jeremy, we're so glad that you're here with us today. And let's start at the beginning. Talk to us a little bit about being an only child and about your family life. What was it like growing up for you?
Well, thank you for that great introduction, Father. Growing up as an only child, I had a very normal childhood. I lived, in a pretty normal rural neighborhood here in Coxsackie. I knew, I learned, very early that, okay, a lot of my friends have siblings, and I understood that I don't. So that's, big deal. So, it was definitely, it was great having, I was like the center of focus for my parents, 24/7, and it was, when I was growing up, for a period of time, I was kind of a lone wolf. There were periods of time in my childhood where I didn't really have many friends, and then, I guess being an only child, kind of, that was already kind of what I was living. So,
yeah. Were you the kind of person who liked your own company? You kind of could entertain yourself pretty well?
Yeah, I was, earlier in my life, I was pretty introverted. Even now, I know you all people know that I can be very social, but I'm still an ambivert. I'm kind of a mix between someone who is introverted and extroverted.
That's a great term, ambivert.
I definitely enjoy my time to myself, but I can be alone with my thoughts. I definitely, I will never undervalue that.
Yeah. And it makes sense. It makes sense, especially that's a great gift for an only child to have. I love that you raised that term ambivert. That's beautiful. That's really good. Introvert gets energy from being on their own. Extrovert gets energy from being with others. Ambivert gets energy from both depending on the situation.
Yeah, it's kind of like a very balanced, social structure, I guess, for me mentally, I like being by myself at times, but then there are other times where I want to be around others. So.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's a great new word to have. I've never used that word before, but I will now, thanks to you. Hey, talk to us about what role God had in your life growing up. Who was God to you? What was that? What did you make of religion and faith?
Well, of course, my mother, being Catholic, coming from a Catholic family, God was always in my life. From my very earliest memories. I was baptized as an infant, and my mother made sure to raise me in the Christian faith. We always went to. St. Mary's was always my church because this has always been my hometown. So, but God to me was, just like the ultimate power, the ultimate creator in all of existence. That's God to me. God is the one being that truly matters. In the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. What is really interesting part of your life is the fact that while your mom has always been a strong Catholic with strong Catholic faith, your dad comes from a very different religious tradition. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so my father comes from a Jewish family. He was born and raised in Catskill, just a couple towns away, and for really my entire life, though, he really didn't practice Judaism a ton, and I think, and from what I learned was, he had lost his parents both to illness back in the '80s. So my dad's parents they had passed well before I was born, so I never got to know them. But yeah, but they come from the Tenenbaums and the Shermans. My father's parents. They have long Jewish lineages. We actually we saw back when I was younger. We went to Ellis Island, and we actually saw an engraving of my father's ancestors coming in through Ellis Island, like in the early 20th century.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
So like I said, like my father's side, again, just a very long lineage of Jewish people.
Wow. It's a pretty wonderful thing for you to have on your father's side the same faith that Jesus grew up with, and on your mother's side the ability to practice that in the tradition of sacraments and the Christian worldview and using the gospel that Jesus gave us. I mean, it's kind of a great combination. I think it's really interesting that you said that you saw God as the ultimate power, because I think that it's a very beautiful and faith-filled way to look at God, but it does, I would imagine, put a little bit of pressure on God, because
it means... and maybe power wasn't, maybe that wasn't the best word. Like, God, of course, God isn't just about power. God is also about love, because, He loves us, His creations. He loves life, which He created.
Yeah.
But of course, God, God is, like I said, our Creator. He is, the ultimate authority in the universe. Nothing is greater than Him.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting too, because I think a lot of us are raised believing that and believing it even now. But it does put us in a tough position when something bad happens, because I don't know, if you're like me, oftentimes when something bad happens, the first thing I do is turn to God and say, okay, please fix this.
Yeah, and especially with all the tragedies and wars and terrorism and genocide that have happened throughout human history. It's and a lot of people are like, how could God let this happen? How could God allow this? And when I think about it, it's like, yeah, I mean, they make a point. It's like it's a tough thing to chew on when you're talking about so many times throughout history where where innocent people have perished, and then that begs the question: did did all this happen for a reason? Is this part of God's plan? For mankind or for life on Earth? It's part of His infinite mystery. We may never know in this life. Maybe mankind is never meant to know. But
yeah.
But when bad things happen, I mean, I absolutely never let it shake my faith. He just even when bad things started to happen, to me and my parents, I just always knew just to hold my head high, and just know that this is just our physical life here on Earth. And I think really that having that strong belief in heaven and the afterlife, kind of made me think like even when if the worst should happen here, this is not the end anyway. So
yeah, you've really shown that by going through this, and as we start to talk about the health issues that your parents had, let's talk a little bit about your growing up. You were born in 1992, so still in your 20s. Would you say that your memories of when you were a kid, were your parents pretty healthy and strong?
Oh yeah, when I was a kid, yeah, they were both very healthy.
So that changed when you were in high school because of a diagnosis that your mom got. Can you talk to us when things first started to be difficult for your mom? What were the early days of her struggle like?
It really, the diagnosis, it kind of really came out of the blue with my mother. I remember toward the end of 2008, I was trying to think, I was in my junior year of high school. So I was already playing football, and of course, going through, my teen years, and, I had graduation coming up the following year. So, I had a lot of, that positive things going through my mind.
Yeah.
Just thinking about, what lies ahead in life. And, And my mother, she really didn't complain about much, especially like physical pain. Like, I just remember, my mother was complaining. It might have been for like a week or two, or maybe a few weeks, that she kept having pains, like in her side and in her abdomen. And it just got to the point where she had to go to the doctor to get it checked out, and then she has a scan done, and then they didn't. I remember from my father telling me, like the scans could not, they couldn't see definitively if it was like cancerous or not, but she had a large lump on one of her ovaries, and she had these other unidentified, like, I guess, well, what do you call it? Just like, you might have to edit this part out.
No, it's all good.
Abnormalities, I guess, throughout her abdomen.
Yeah.
So, they knew they had to do surgery, as soon as possible. And I think once the surgeon went in there and removed everything, that's when they found out, okay, it's cancer. It's, ovarian cancer. And it was already stage 3 by the time she had that hysterectomy surgery.
Wow. And you are a junior in high school.
Junior in high school. And I actually found, my father was the one that told me. I think my mother was just kind of, she was probably just in shock from it. And she was just so, she was probably very worried about, how it mentally impact me. So I heard it from my father. I think we were actually at a high school basketball game or something, and because that's when he told me about listen, the scans they did on your mother, they found something, and they'll have to operate, and then, like I said, after the operation, it's like, oh, she has cancer now. So. Ooh,
what was your reaction to that? What was going on inside of you when you heard that?
Just, I think just what anyone would have, just shock. Yeah. Like, are you kidding me? Like, my mother, my mother has cancer, and you just kind of stand there, and from that point, it's like, my childhood will never be the same now.
Oh.
Yeah. It's just shock, and then a real, sobering realization that, life's going to be different now, and it's, and this could very well define the rest of my mother's life, especially hearing that it was a later stage of cancer.
Yeah, absolutely. Those first 5 years, she was never again cancer free. Is that right? It was always a battle from that point on.
She did have periods of remission.
Did she?
Yeah, she did, and actually the first one was actually it was the longest and probably the best one from what I remember. So after her surgery, so this was like January of 2009. She had, they gave her about a month off, just to recover from the surgery and everything, get her body back to to normal, and then she started. I think she ended up doing, I believe, 6 or 7 very aggressive rounds of chemotherapy, which lasted all the way through spring. And then I think the last of the rounds she finished up, I believe, in May or June of 2009. And it beat the hell out of her. Like, it was really rough, but. And she, of course, she lost all of her hair immediately, and then, she was starting to have neuropathy, and she was I remember coming home from school, and, there were days where she had, like, fainting spells, and I remember this one day, she collapsed to the floor, I think, 3 times, within an hour.
Oh, boy.
And it was just, it was just very scary for me to see. I'm like, man, this is, I just still can't believe, this is happening to my mom. And I'm like, and there's nothing I can do.
Yeah. Were you, at that point, were you making a role for yourself in this? Were you kind of figuring out, I'm going to learn about this disease?
Absolutely, yeah. I knew, because my father, he still had to work, so, he can only be with mom so much. And I knew, especially, since I was growing up, I was kind of, in that transition between, a boy and, and then, becoming a man. I was like, we're going to, for mom, it's like my father can't be the only man of the house. I'm going to have to, pitch in myself.
It's
because it's going to take everything we have to support her and help her get through this.
It's like you said, my childhood will never be the same again. That's gone now.
That definitely went through my head. It was, like I said, it was shock and just like, you're kidding me. Like, because, like I said, both of their health had been, fine. My parents were both, a little bit overweight at the time, but, nothing drastic. But, and then just when I found that out, I'm just like, like everything's going to change now. And you just, I know for some people it might take a long time to just let that soak in, kind of like to kind of digest that. But for me, it was like, well, all right, well, I gotta, I'm still a student. I gotta continue going to school. I gotta press on toward graduation. I still wanted to, obviously compete in sports and do school clubs. But there was always going to be this thing in the back of my mind, like, my mom has cancer.
Yeah.
And like that's my new priority right now, is making sure she's okay.
Wow. Can you think back to what your mood was at graduation? At graduation, were you thinking, okay, maybe we got this? Was she in a good spot around graduation time?
Oh yeah, she was. During the summer of '09, she was actually in remission. She was still reeling from a lot of the side effects. It took her really the whole summer and then some, I think, to really grow her hair back. And that was something, she was always so, worried about, like, how long is it going to take for my hair to come back? I'm like, oh, Mom, forget about your hair. It's like, how is your health?
Yeah.
But, of course, my mom, I remember I went wig shopping with her one or two times. And she bought. I remember she got so many different wigs. So I think, I don't know, maybe just the whole vanity thing was kind of helping her take her mind off the more serious part of having cancer. But that was her thing. Like, if she had her hair, then she was good.
That's a pretty tender. It's a pretty tender picture in my mind, and I imagine in the mind of many of our listeners, to hear that you were shopping for wigs with your mom. I mean, what a loving thing for a son to do at that age. A lot of kids that age don't want to go anywhere with their parents. They're like, I just want to be out. I just want to be with my friends. I just want to be doing my own thing or playing my sports.
I don't want to be with my parents, man. I got friends. I got a life. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, but the thought of you being there wig shopping with your mom. Wow. So I remember, we even went on a vacation in that summer in '09. We went to one of the many places on the Atlantic coast. I forget. It was like it might have been like Myrtle Beach or someplace like that. Yeah.
Or Rehoboth Beach in Delaware, one of those places. But yeah, we went there. I remember, Mom got a chance, to really relax for the first time in months. And she was starting to, little by little, like I said, like those side effects you get from chemo, it takes a long time for your body to kind of heal from that.
Yeah.
But then going into my senior year of high school, she had a full head of hair back, and she was able to get it colored and stuff regularly, and then she was actually able to go back to work for the state. She actually went back full time, I remember, for a while. And then I believe, I don't know, when she had her first recurrence, I think maybe that's when she dropped to like part-time, but she went back to work full-time, months later, and, like I said, I was a senior in high school. That was probably like the best year of high school for me personally, and then as you were saying before, high school graduation, things were really looking up, by the time I graduated high school, she was like a full year into remission. And of course, she kept going back for checkups regularly, and every time she turned out clear, it was like a little victory we got to celebrate. So
yeah. How was your dad dealing with your mom's illness emotionally? What did he do to keep forging ahead? I could imagine some spouses would try to pretend it wasn't going on as much as possible, act as normal as possible.
Yeah,
how did he do it?
Yeah, and there was no pretending in this household. We were always very frank with each other. my father, he was never a super emotional person. Like I know, and I think I don't know if that was just from because of what he went through, his upbringing, but um, he was. Yeah, like I said, he was definitely like the leader of the household. He was the one that, of course, obviously, my mother had to kind of, uh, kind of pull his leg a little bit with, certain decisions and financial decisions and stuff like that. But, I think Dad's focus was just, just keep moving forward in life. And like I said, I think honestly, once the recurrences started with Mom, that's when, we started seeing him, become a little more like settled down, and he started becoming a little bit more like, all right, let's, maybe all these little things in life that I focus on so much, or maybe I can just not worry about that, and and I think as Mom's health started to ail, I think it kind of like showed him like what really matters in life even more. Like I said, even though he was always a good person, he was always a morally like good person. So
yeah,
but that was my father. Like I said, just a lot like my mother. They were never emotional people for the most part. So that was my parents. That's who they were.
Talk to me about when your dad first started showing signs of cognitive struggle. Your mom had been dealing with cancer for a while.
I still, to this day, and I will never forget the very first warning sign that my mother and I noticed. I had just graduated. I got my 2-year degree from Hudson Valley Community College. The very next week, we flew out to California, out to San Francisco, and we took a vacation out there.
Wow.
And the day we got there, we stayed at this hotel right up by the Fisherman's Wharf, like right on the edge of the bay.
Yeah.
And we had a long day of flying, and we were a little bit jet lagged. So we just we checked in, we got our stuff in, we just immediately just laid down on the beds for a little bit, and and then we were like, all right, we'll get up at some point and we'll go walk around and see what there is to see, maybe find a place to eat. But so Mom and I are just kind of relaxing, and of course, my father, every vacation, as soon as we get into the room, he starts unpacking all the suitcases and filling up the dressers with all our clothes. He sets up the bathroom with all our toiletries. He's very, it's like that's his routine anytime we take a trip. And Mom and I just kind of were like, yeah, we're just going to lay down. But I remember, he got finished unpacking everything, and he wanted to go walk outside and just take a look around, the neighborhood we were in. And he couldn't find the door.
Oh.
Like the door, he kept, and Mom and I didn't really notice at first, but he just could not find the doorknob. And then how, like in certain rooms, there'll be like that door that leads directly into the next room, but they always keep it bolted shut.
Yes.
So he was able to see that door. He kept yanking on that one, but, it was dead bolted. And it was locked. And I'm like, Dad, that's the wrong door. What are you doing? That door goes into the adjacent room. So he would go back to searching for the door. I'm like, Dad, you all right? Like, what's going on? And he's just, and he's just telling me like, yeah, I don't know. I'm just trying to find the door. And I'm like, Dad, you're standing next to it. Like, it's the doorknob is right there.
Yeah.
And then, Mom was just like, Jeff, what's the matter with you? You just, we're thinking like, all right, maybe he's jet lagged. He's just kind of a little bit loopy or something. Who knows?
Right.
So it took him, and my Mom and I, we didn't get up to help him because like we knew that's like, all right, he's gonna get this. It took him like 10, maybe 15 minutes to finally find the doorknob to go outside.
At that point, Jeremy, how old would he be? When you were about 20, he was in his mid-50s?
So 2012, so he would have been 56, I believe. My
56
math is right.
is
Yeah, you know,
young.
55, 56. He was about that age.
That's a
When we were on
young,
that trip.
young prime of life age.
Mm-hmm.
Not the kind of age you expect to have confusion and dementia.
No, and, dementia didn't even cross our minds. Mom and I would, because once he found, and before he found the doorknob, he was like trying to like open the window as if he was trying to claw out the window or something. I'm like, what is his problem right now? And I'm sitting there, I'm
Yeah.
like, Dad, turn around, the door's there. So, once he, like I said, he eventually got it. After an excruciating long amount of time watching him trying to, he was trying to feel the walls, trying to feel for a crease, and it was just weird. And then, after that, he was perfectly fine the rest of the trip. Mom and I just kind of wrote it off as like, all right, maybe he was just jet lagged, a little loopy, I don't know.
Right.
And then he didn't show another warning sign probably until months later.
Wow. What's an example of another kind of warning sign that you remember?
Driving. His driving abilities, it definitely it took a noticeable plunge. He would be, as long as he was like in town or anything like that, he would be fine. But he started, and this was the beginning of that visual spatial disorientation. That was like the very first symptom of his disease, and to this day, it's still the most prevalent symptom.
Wow.
Anytime, if I was like riding passenger with him, if we were on one of those back roads with no lines painted on it, he would kind of like lose, he would kind of lose track of like where on the road he was. Sometimes he would be driving in the middle of the road. I'm like, Dad, there's a blind turn coming up. Maybe you want to get to the right. And he's like, I am. And I'm like, Dad, no, you're not. You're like, you're basically half in the other lane. You don't go around blind turns or over blind hills in the middle of the road. Like, you get over to the right. That's what you do. And so I started noticing that a little bit. He started having a little bit of difficulty in the workplace because he spent his whole career working for GE Plastics in Selkirk, which turned over to Sabic. And then they basically did the same stuff. A lot, plastics manufacturing and that kind of stuff. And then part of Dad's job was he did a lot of like laboratory work, like measurements of chemicals and that kind of stuff. So he started. I remember overhearing him telling Mom like, yeah, he had days of work where he was like screwing up measurements a lot, and then his supervisor was starting to get on his case about it, and and then just with that, and then the driving, and then a few other things. He's starting to have slight trouble putting his clothes on correctly when he'd get dressed, and I think at that point we're like, all right, Dad, something's clearly going on. We're gonna get you checked out.
Yeah.
So,
how long did it take to get a diagnosis?
So his diagnosis, it was actually the second opinion. He saw a neurologist, and I guess didn't really like the answers that he gave him. Went to, I guess, arguably a better neurologist who's affiliated with Albany Med. And then they did. They did like an MRI of Dad's head, and they did all these other like special scans that can like measure the brain activity, and then this neurologist was like, I am, without a doubt, this is Alzheimer's disease that's developing, and then so that was at like the end of 2013, early 2014. I remember I was home from college on winter break, and he just told me one day, he's like, yeah, because I knew he was seeing a neurologist about what was going on with his short-term memory lapses and like I said, the visual problems he was having. And once he said Alzheimer's, I'm just I'm just like now it's both of them, and I actually kind of teared up a little bit, and I'm just like, this is ridiculous now. I'm like, Mom, of course, Mom, at this point, Mom was, bouncing in and out of like very, very short-lived remissions, and then before she knew it, she was back on some other treatment again. So she was kind of barely hanging in herself, and now Dad is developing a disease where he's not going to be able to do anything on his own eventually, and then now it's going to be back on Mom and I to help him while I'm trying to help Mom with what she's going through.
And Jeremy, you're 21, 22 years old, and you're realizing, the words you just said make me feel so heavy. Now it's both of them. For a young man to say now.
Like, it's going to be like a two-fronted battle.
Oh.
For years to come. It's like, now I'm going to, and I knew, because, obviously it's not like anything immediately had to change, but I knew, like, I knew I still had to finish up college, because I still had like another year and a half to go, give or take, and and I just knew once I got out of college, I was going to have to stay at home for a while and look after them.
Oh, Jeremy,
because they were only going to be able to take care of each other for so long.
Who was more upset at that point with what they were going through? Who was the most upset person? You said they weren't very emotional people, but did that change when things got this hard?
I think Mom she clearly got more upset, because my dad, my dad, I'm sure there's a lot going on in his mind, but he didn't, like I said, he didn't outwardly show a lot, emotionally speaking. I'm sure he felt bad, but my mother, was just like kind of like what I was saying, like if it's not enough for me to have cancer, now my husband has Alzheimer's.
Oh.
And our one son, he's stuck in the middle of all this too.
Oh, it's just,
Yep.
It truly is. Do you remember, this is a very personal question, but then again, that's exactly what this kind of conversation is for. Do you remember what you were saying to God back then? What were your prayers like? Were you asking God to reverse it? Please make this not true. Or did you pray that there would be a miracle? What were the kind of things you were praying for as you?
I tend to not pray for things that I know aren't going to happen. Like I obviously knew, it's like, all right, it's medically impossible for there to be a reversal. It's like, Alzheimer's. I think Dad's diagnosis. We started learning more and more about the disease, and there's really no treatment for it. They're like memory pills. I should say pills that patients can take to kind of stimulate their memory a little bit, but it just kind of slows down the progression of the disease. And I knew there was I already knew there's no cure for it. It's not like cancer where it's like, all right, if you're doing treatment, if you're doing radiation, if you're doing chemo, at least you have a chance. But with Alzheimer's, it just goes to show how much more progress needs to be made for that disease and all kinds of other neurological ailments.
Jeremy,
but I remember, I remember, of course, when I've been spending time by myself, I just remember, just talking to God and saying, like, God, like, this is, I almost kind of had like developed like an imagination where like everything was normal again, but like I said, I don't pray for things that I know aren't going to happen.
Yeah.
I think it was kind of better for me to just accept it gradually.
I hear that.
And at least just pray for the strength to help them through it, and just hope for the best that can come out of it. So
it's a very mature, very, very mature attitude. I mean, I'm just very aware of that even people who practice their faith very strongly, very faithfully, many of them who are listening right now are thinking, and forgive me for imposing this on them, but I just know myself and others, well enough from experience of conversations. People are thinking, God, please undo this. Please let a miracle happen. Please let this be the one in a million.
And I'd be lying if I said, I didn't have those thoughts going through my head, but I don't think I ever actually, got on my knees and prayed that, because I'm like, that's just, even God knows, and like I said, not to, I don't want to sound like a downer for other people that pray for miracles, but like, I just, I just have to be real, it's times like that where I have to really be frank with myself and be like, really, am I really praying for a medical impossibility? Like, but I think most, I pray for, like I said, more practical things. Like I just said, pray, just, let us have the strength we need to get through this, let life continue as normally as possible for us for as long as possible. Let us enjoy, as much of life as we can before this really starts getting bad.
Yeah.
And, even when it starts getting bad, hopefully, we'll still be able to, keep it in the back of our minds and still just be able to, enjoy things and laugh about things. And
Jeremy, when did your dad need to move out of the house because of his illness?
2017. So just over 3 years ago. Very early that year. Because let me just I'll quickly get you up to that point. Dad was at the point where, Mom had to basically, she didn't have to dress him, but like she had to, make sure like he was putting on his clothes correctly. He needed assistance with that. He got to the point where he couldn't sort out his own medications anymore. Either Mom or I had to give him his meds every day. He was still, I think by 2016, he had actually given up driving. And he decided on his own, under his own will, to not drive anymore. Like Mom and I knew that, we were restricting him. Like, if you're gonna drive, Dad, in town only, that's it. Stay on the town roads, which he was still able to negotiate. Or if he was going to drive to the YMCA to go work out, he could still do that because he could still park. But then once driving went, and then, like I said, dressing himself, medications, he was still able to cook basic things, or at least help Mom cook. But he started losing that ability. But when 2017 rolled around, we started looking at assisted living facilities, the three of us. So we went on some family field trips together.
Yeah.
We looked at some of the places owned by the Eddy Corporation. We're actually, the Eddy is, they're like St. Peter's Health Partners, I think.
Yes.
So we looked at the one in East Greenbush, and we looked at Atria Guilderland, where my father, wound up living at for 2 years. But then, of course, we were looking at some local places. So there were two places in Catskill that we knew of. There was Home Sweet Home, and then there was the Eddy in Jefferson Heights. So June of that year, 2017, we made the decision, like, all right, we're going to move Dad into the Eddy, because like the Eddy, they're a very baseline assisted living community. People that live there still have to have a certain degree of independence. Places like that, they'll do your laundry, they'll cook your meals, they'll organize activities and stuff. They'll even they'll have people that can take you on walks occasionally, but other than that, you're kind of left to your own devices. And I think when they evaluated my father, they didn't really realize that, he has a real problem, negotiating, seeing things and making sense out of things. And then, of course, he was a wanderer. So he had actually walked out the front door a few times, and they had to bring him back in before he would go very far. So that was an issue. And then he would have his nighttime episodes. They call it sundowner syndrome.
Yeah.
It's very common for people with dementia, where you're mentally completely out of whack, After basically during nighttime, and he had a lot of like hallucinations, a lot of delusions. It wasn't every night, but it started happening enough nights out of the week where, all right, Mom and I, we would get woken up, so many nights by him wandering around the house at night, just talking about nonsense and claiming that there was other people in the house, or that he's not even in his own home, and it's just, and all Mom and I could do was just get him back to bed and hopefully, hope he could sleep through the rest of the night, but so he was having that too. So we moved him into, like I said, the Elliott in Catskill, and then a couple weeks later, it was just too much for them. It was clear that he needed a higher level of care. So, we moved him back into the house 2 weeks later.
Oh my!
And then he lived at home again for a month, and then in July, sometime in July that year, we were like, okay, well, we saw this place, Atria Gilderland. We liked it. They're a lot more expensive, but we can afford it for the foreseeable future. So we moved him there, and that's where he was for 2 years.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Now, 2017 was a terrible year for your dad because of this new stage of his illness. But Jeremy, it was also a really hard year for your mom with her cancer.
2017. I mean, that was probably the worst year of my life, Father.
Oh.
In terms of like stress and then just knowing what my parents, because my father, we had to move him out of the house. That's, it's like just imagine you're someone my age and you're like, and you actually have to make plans to move one of your parents out of their own home.
I can't imagine.
It's just it's a tough thing to chew on.
25 years old.
Yeah, and and my father, and I guess the silver lining of this was my father went along with this. He and I think, part of me thinks he still is. He was always aware of his own illness. He knew that he was declining. Like he didn't. I mean, there were times he got, he kind of he would throw a tantrum or two with Mom and I about something ridiculous. But I think overall, like he knew that. Even when we moved him into Atria, when some of the staff there, like the administrators and people were introducing themselves to him, and then like the director of the unit he lived in, when she was getting to know him, I remember I'd be sitting there with him, and he would tell her, oh yeah, I'm Jeff, I have Alzheimer's disease.
Wow.
And she was like, wow, he's really self-aware. That's incredible. A lot of people with that illness are in complete denial that they even have a problem.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So
unusual.
My father, he was very cooperative with Mom and I. Like, he was, he wasn't picky at all. Like, we showed him, like we went to a couple places that kind of looked like, I don't know if I'd be comfortable with you living here. And, and Dad would just be like, it seems okay.
Yeah.
And then, then of course, like Atria being, a much nicer place. I'm just like, okay, Mom and I felt good moving them there, and like I said, we sucked it up and put up with the cost of it.
Yes.
And then, but like I said, early on though, Dad he had to adjust mentally to, like I said, to living with these completely different surroundings with strangers that he's never met before. So, and then as the months went by, he actually really started becoming very happy with where he was. Which made Mom and I happy.
I can imagine. I'm so aware, though, for your mother, who at that point was in her late 50s, she kept having, like you said, my childhood now will never be the same. She had to say, oh my goodness, marriage the way I've known it is over.
Yeah.
This partnership.
That was the truth of it.
Yeah. Oh, how challenging. Jeremy, your mom in the year 2017 was fighting hard. This was a year, was it not, of a lot of clinical trials? She really worked hard at surviving.
So in 2016, that was a little bit of a rough year for us too, because that was when women's cancer care at St. Peter's basically was out of options for her. They had nothing left to treat her with, and I remember sitting in the room with her oncologist when he told us, because she just came off of a chemo treatment which gave her a bad case of thrush, which for if you don't know, Father, and people listening don't know, it's like a fungal infection that starts in your mouth, and if you don't treat it right away, it can go down into your digestive tract, and then at that point, it's very life-threatening. So she had a really nasty side effect from a drug. She did get treated for it, and then after that, after she recovered, that's when our oncologist was like, "All right, Debbie, listen, we have to stop trying to treat you. Like this last chemo and what you just had, this could have killed you."
Oh.
And so it's like, and just seeing that serious look on her doctor's face and that serious tone when he said, "We can't treat you anymore," and then he started recommending palliative care and then eventually hospice care. And I'm just like, I'm there with like, my jaw almost dropped. I'm like, what? And, I don't think Mom was prepared to really hear that too.
Oh.
So,
Jeremy.
yeah, and basically it's just like, her doctor, not that he doesn't want to, not that he wouldn't like to try, but I think just being a medical professional, he knew that continuing all these crazy drugs that, some of them aren't even really targeted for ovarian cancer, I think he knew that continuing to try to treat her would have done her more harm than good at that point.
Oh boy.
So then, Mom had already talked to doctors at Sloan Kettering in New York by that time, and then I think one of the chemo nurses recommended Dana-Farber in Boston, which I'm sure you living out there, Father. I'm sure you've heard of that hospital.
That's right. Yeah, I spent 10 years in Boston, and it's one of the very best and most famous cancer hospitals, and they do a lot of research there.
They're highly regarded for treating like children's cancer. They're basically like the St. Jude's of the Northeast. I remember anytime we went there was a lot of children in wheelchairs. I mean, it was very sad to see, but it's like, well, you know what? If they're here, they have a fighting chance because this is a very good hospital. So,
Jeremy, one of the things I'm hearing in your voice right now, even as you say that, and as you talk about your mom in this stage of her treatment, you have an unusual gift of holding on to hope. What does hope look like in 2017 when your mom is going through this? What does hope look like? What is hope?
Hope? Well, hope is, I think hope is that, and really it starts and ends with my mother. It was her determination to be like, like I said, when her oncologist at St. Peter's told her, "We can't treat you anymore," it's like, not, of course she was really thrown back by that, but she was, I think it actually gave her more resolve to be like, "I'm not giving up." Like, wow. I know, she's like, if there's a place out there that'll treat me, that's where I'll go. And then when I remember when we made that first trip out to Dana-Farber, all three of us went, both my parents and myself, and we sat down and talked to her new oncologist out there, and the doctor sounded she sounded very upbeat. She sounded like, she was very positive. She actually wrote down on paper a bunch of possible treatment options that they could try that my mother would have been a candidate for. Wow. And and it was very uplifting, because like that oncologist in Boston, like she was. I think her and Mom had the same mentality. She's like, you know what, we have access to more treatments than St. Peter's did, and it's like, I can tell by looking at you. She's like, you're you're in your 50s. You're still young, and she's like, looking at you, you physically look like you have some fight left in you, and you still are physically healthy, outside of the whole cancer thing. And, she I think my mother and that oncologist were on the same page about, like, you know what, we're not going to leave a stone unturned. We're gonna try one thing. If that doesn't work, or if it backfires or something, we'll give you some time off, and then we'll try the next thing.
Wow.
So that, it was very like definitive, the plan of attack, as soon as we got to Dana-Farber. And then I think that really gave me hope. I'm like, all right, like I'm already liking this place.
Yeah. Jeremy, what was the last experiment that she was willing to do? And that what was the last?
The very last thing she went on, it was a phase 2 clinical trial. So clinical trials come in 3 phases. So phase 1 means it's something that's just out of the laboratory, and it may have been tested on animals at that point, but it's basically, phase 1 means it's approved for clinical trial use in healthcare facilities, but it's still kind of like on an experimental basis. Like they need to conduct human trials to gather data about its efficacy and its side effects and all that. Phase 2, I really never understood the big jump from 1 to 2, but phase 2 means like they have like a usable amount of data from human trials, but then phase 3 is when it gets FDA approval, and then it can be used in any healthcare facility anywhere in the country.
Wow.
So it was a phase 2 trial. My mom did qualify for it, and she actually, I know she failed to qualify for at least one other phase 2 trial before that. So, because my mom was coming off of what's called a PARP inhibitor. It's a non-chemo treatment. She was able to take it in pill form. And I'm not going to go into the whole scientific explanation, but it attacks cancer a little bit differently than chemotherapy. And then, so my mother was on it early in 2017, like through the winter and into the spring, and it was working. Her numbers were going the opposite direction, which was a good sign. It was showing that, all right, it's doing some good. And her side effects were very minimal from it. And then all of a sudden, it just kind of, it crapped out on her. And then her numbers started spiking again. So we knew, and that was kind of heartbreaking because, like, she was on something. It was like the first time in like years that she could take, the same drug for months, and it was doing something. So. So when she got into this phase 2 trial, this was, I think this was like August 2017. Of course, Dad was already living at Atria, so it was just Mom and I at the hospital. We went out to Boston. We were going to have to stay one night, if not 2 nights. I don't remember, but we went out there the day before where she just got some like pre-screening done. And then we spent, we had the rest of the day to ourselves. We actually did a little trolley tour of Boston, and we got to enjoy ourselves a little bit. Had dinner together and everything. And then the next day, we go back into the hospital, into the cancer care center, and here we go. It was a very long IV transfusion. I think it was supposed to be like a 4-hour long transfusion, which is a long time to be hooked up to an IV. And then they were expecting her to get side effects right away, which she did. They moved her into another room where she could have more privacy. And then it just started getting worse and worse. And then it got to the point where the side effects were starting to worry the nurses. So they decided to stop. I think after she did complete the 4-hour transfusion, so they unhooked her from that, and then they were expecting her side effects to kind of reach their climax and then start to kind of settle out, but the side effects were just continuing to get worse. So they had to admit her into the Brigham and Women's Hospital next door, and it was getting late. There was a lot of long wait time. Like, she was in the emergency room for a while. I was sitting there with her. And then it became, then when the doctor finally saw her, like, they're like, yeah, we're going to have to admit you into the hospital. Like, you're definitely not leaving here tonight. Possibly not even tomorrow night. We'll see. So that was news to us. So, I remember once they got Mom admitted, because, we were supposed to stay at most one more night and then be going home the next day. And so I remember Mom just told me, like, Jeremy, you know what? why don't you just drive yourself home? I know you have work, you have things you have to do. I'm sure, you're going to have to check on, your father. She's like, I'll stay here. Because the first thing they're going to have to keep her for maybe an extra day or two. So I was like, are you sure? And she was like, yeah. And then she said, once I know, the day that they're going to discharge me, just come back out here and drive me back home. So I'm like, okay. So I drove home by myself. And then about a couple days later, I was on the phone with the doctor, and the side effects were just not subsiding at all. And they were like, we might have to keep her a week now. So, and I'm just like, oh boy, like what did we get into? It's you know what I mean. It's like all of a sudden it's like this went from a clinical trial to opening up Pandora's box or something.
Oh.
So, of course, my mother, the side effects got so bad that she actually lost her speaking voice for about 2 entire weeks. So she tried to talk to me on the phone. I could barely understand her, and I was like, what, Mom, just save your strength, save your breath, and I'm like, I'm coming back out there. Like I have to come see you at least. At least on my off days from work, I'm like, I'm coming out there and I'm going to spend time with you. She told me not to. She said her best friend has a daughter that lives outside of Boston, so her friend actually drove out there and spent the week with her daughter, and she was with my mom every day, all day long, while she was out there.
Is that best friend?
No,
is that the one?
Home. I don't want you to have to come back and forth to Boston. So
is that best friend the one who lived in Indiana? Lynn, is it?
She has a daughter in Indiana, but no, Lynn and her husband, they live in Gilderland.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. So this is, so amazing friend. This is an amazing thing to have when you couldn't be there with your mom. She had this, like, these friends went like angels in your place. That's really amazing.
And I felt so bad because I'm just like, Lynn's going out there, and I'm thinking like, it's like, what am I doing? It's like I'm home for what? Like, I was checking on Dad. That was when I was like checking on Dad like a couple of times every week, and I'm like, other than that, I'm like, I got my Home Depot job, and it's like, and I'm like thinking I really should be with Mom, but once I found out Lynn was going out there, I'm like, well. I guess, if my mom really wants me to stay here and just focus on me and Dad, then, I'll honor her wishes then. So it was tough. They ended up keeping her out there for 17 days.
Wow. And
17 days, and I think the last couple of days she finally got her voice back, like to just about full strength. And Lynn was I think Lynn. I think Lynn may have stayed out there for the entire time. Maybe she came back home and then went back out there when they discharged her. Because I think, and that's when Lynn, and Lynn and Dirk, her husband, they're still like they're among the most helpful people you could ever hope for. And I think Lynn was just trying to save me another trip to Boston. So she was the one that brought my mother home after the 17 days. And my mother. She was able to walk and everything. They gave her a walker, but she didn't really need it. She was able to walk. She still looked a little bit roughed up, but, at least her voice was back. Her energy level was, like, fairly good. And then, but like I said, the last remnants of her symptoms were still just kind of hanging on. So she was home for, like, a day or two. And then she was like, and then one morning she was like, Jeremy, I think you're gonna have to take me to the hospital. I'm still not feeling right. And I took her up to St. Peter's in Albany, the Women's Cancer Care, and of course one of the nurses that she knew for all this time saw her. She's like, Debbie. She's like, oh my God, how are you doing? And she's like, are you still getting treated in Boston, yada yada? And she's like, and then she could see my mom's physical appearance. She's like, what happened to you? My mom gave her the whole story about the clinical trial backfiring and everything. So they brought in some more chemo nurses to kind of look at her. They hooked her up to like a bag of saline solution, and they just want to at least get my mom's energy level back up. And then so they decided to admit her into St. Peter's for 5 more days until she was fully over her symptoms. So at least in Albany, I was able to go up and see her every day. And then I think during that 5 days that she was there, I think, and she, and maybe while she was in Boston, she probably had a lot of time to reflect. And then during the 5 days at St. Peter's, she decided that this is it. I'm going on the hospice care. She's like, I'm done. So that was that.
Were you able to accept?
Honestly, after something like that happens, even myself, I wasn't all that surprised by her decision. It was really like a decision. I'm like, oh, please don't tell me you're gonna do it. You're gonna stop treatment altogether. And she's just like, Jeremy, I think this is like a sign that I have to stop because. It was like her original oncologist said, if she kept trying all of these treatments that weren't really meant for her, they were going to do more harm than good, and that's exactly what that last clinical trial did. It really set her back a lot, and early on when she was in hospice, she did recover some more of her health, like the symptoms completely did go away by the time that she was discharged from St. Peter's, and then. And then the first couple months, she was back at home. She was okay, but then the hospice nurses would be visiting every day to, help her with her personal care or whatever she needed. And, she actually had some other volunteers come by to run errands for her to kind of lighten the load on me a little bit. And that's kind of how it went.
Were you with her in the end?
I'm sorry?
Were you with her in the end, Jeremy?
I was. Yep.
You were.
January 14th, 2018. That was the night she passed. I was right there in the room with her.
Wow.
I was because at that point they had brought a hospital bed into, and she was like, basically, she was spending all hours of the day and night, in the living room where we had the bed set up. And that night I was standing right at her side, and I remember her eyes were still kind of partly open, but she was asleep, and I remember trying to wake her up. I was trying to very, very, obviously she was in such a fragile state. I was trying to very gently wake her up and ask her if she needed any because at that point she was on like morphine and stuff, and or if she needed to sip on something to drink or anything, and she just wouldn't wake up, and then her breathing started to become slower and slower, and I'm like, uh-oh. So I got on the phone with the on-call hospice nurse, and I said, yeah, my mother's breathing is getting a little bit irregular, and she's definitely in like a deep sleep. Like she's not waking up. I'm trying to, I'm just trying to see if she needs anything. And they said, just keep us posted. If it seems like she's getting worse, then I'll come by. So a few minutes later, her bleeding stopped, and then I was panicking. Got on the phone with the hospital nurse again, like, you need to get here now. She stopped breathing, and then the nurse just said, Jeremy, she might be gone. Like, this might be it. So she said, I'll be there as soon as I can, and then that was it. I was right there at her side when she passed.
What a faithful, faithful son. What a faithful son to be there, 25 years old, and your mom was 60. Oh, Jeremy, wow. I can't imagine I can't imagine that journey. And of course, one of the things that we have to honor as we hear this is that your dad was obviously not there because he was living at Atria.
Yeah, he was at Atria, and I didn't even, the next, like I said, it happened pretty late at night, and the people with Brady's funeral home, they came and they took her body, and there was more hospice staff that was there. My mom's case manager was there. Her case manager was actually a personal friend of ours too, so small town or small world, I should say. And they were there to just kind of they were just there to just make sure I was all right, and I just I had some emotions I had to let out, and I just said, you guys go, it's late, and I had a couple of my friends come over in the middle of the night, and they spent a good part of the night with me.
Oh, wow.
Yep. And then the next day I woke up. I don't know, it was just something like when I went to sleep, like I said, it was it was a very hard sleep that night. Like, I'm just like, this is it. Like, mom is gone. I'm officially in the house alone. I'm like, it just keeps getting more and more different for me. Which I knew that day was gonna come, but now I'm actually living it.
Oh.
So. Yep, and then I remember I woke up the next day. I actually kind of had like a surprisingly clear head, and I had a lot of things I had to start doing. I had to get back in touch with the funeral home and start making some initial plans for what it's the middle of winter, so I'm like, when do we how far do we want to push the funeral? That way we can still do the burial and everything outside. And then I had a lot of phone calls to make to relatives. I was so busy that first day on the 15th, I didn't even have a chance to go up and see Dad. So the next day, I went up first thing to see him. I told him the news. He did have a little bit of a sad look on his face, but I think it was just like, because he knew, even with Alzheimer's, he knew that mom was in such rough shape, and he didn't, like I said, he didn't, like I said, he's not an emotional person, as I told you a few times, and he didn't shed a tear or anything, and he just kind of hung his head for a bit, and I said, I'm like, she's gone, Dad. So it's just you and me now.
Wow.
And he just kind of took it as it was.
Jeremy, what in that those days of January and February 2018 this was 2018.
2018, yep.
What was your prayer like then? You now you've lost your mom and your dad is not home with you. How were you talking to God at that point?
I think I was. I'm just trying to remember how I felt because it was. I think I remember I think I was in touch with so many people. I think I remember I kept saying over and over. I said like, yeah, this. How people say like, I'm kind of turning over a new leaf, or this is a new chapter of my life. It was more than that. This is like a new era for my life.
Yes.
Yep, it's a complete transformation from, from one status quo to my current status quo with things.
A lot of people would say that you've been dealt a really bad hand with what you faced, having both of your parents, in a sense, taken from you, in each in their own way. How do you cope? First of all, how do you react to the thought, this is a really bad hand, and how do you cope with having a hand that was bad dealt to you?
I think, I'm not someone that ever, I don't really have a whole lot of self-pity because I know earlier in our conversation I told you how read about things and I've seen, documentaries and videos about things that are much worse. And then I look at myself and I'm like, well, you know what? As bad as this is, at least, with Mom's death, even back when, like you said, especially when she started hospice, even before that, even when she started treatment at Boston, or maybe even earlier than that, maybe when she was doing her last couple of treatments with St. Peter's, she knew that, it was just the odds were so stacked against her to ever be rid of cancer. She just knew, like, everything she did at that point was just trying to buy herself more time. And then, and really, at the end, I think she was really trying to buy her more time, both for my sake and for Dad's sake, to make sure that he was settled into a place that was going to be able to take care of him, and to make sure that I was, mentally in a place where I'd be prepared to handle everything, to handle the house, the finances, Dad, and then not to mention myself. So.
Wow.
I forgot what your original question was already.
Well, I think you answered it. I'm curious about hearing what grief was.
That's right. You were talking about. I'm sorry to interrupt, but yeah, you're saying, do you feel like you've been dealt a bad hand? Well, like I said, there's people, and I've talked to people that have lost loved ones very suddenly, and I think that's definitely a worse hand than I've had, because at least with my mother, we had all this time to really prepare for her passing, and she had time to say farewell to all the friends and her family, and her and I and Dad, we had all this time to come to terms with, the whole, with death itself, and moving on. And I think Mom, and if my mom was still here right now, I think she would agree that, you know what, if I've always to go, I'm sure, I know she wished she could have lived longer to see me, get married or have kids of my own. But I think, of all the bad ways a person can go, I don't think this was such a bad way, because, like I said, she had so much time to have closure. That was the word I was trying to think of. To have closure with me and her friends and her family, and even with God, even with her own beliefs and her own morals. It's like everything. What everything in her life has amounted to, and what everything boiled down to, I'm sure she was grateful to have all that time to prepare and to have that closure before she passed.
It's a beautiful perspective. I think a lot of times, like you said, it's almost as difficult as a long, challenging illness can be. It allows you to get your affairs in order, as people say, spiritually and otherwise.
Too. Like she, especially with, of course, my father was, he was set up and he was living comfortably in a good place, and she'd made sure that, bank accounts were set up appropriately, and she made sure that I had a good understanding of the family's financials and of income, and like everything that I was going to have to take over, and even her own funeral arrangements. She actually, when she was in her final few weeks, I remember we had one of the partners of the funeral home come over, and she actually started making her own funeral arrangements. And so, she even got that set up for me. So.
She was an incredibly strong person. I mean, she did lots of frank talking with me too. I remember coming and talking about funeral plans with her. And and I also know how much she loved and admired you. She knew that you were a special son. I mean, no one could have been better handpicked for a situation this hard. A son who refuses self-pity and is willing to be present to his parents in all the ways that are most important for as long as they need him. It's a really remarkable blending.
Thank you, Father. And it's something, and actually, this is something I don't even know if I ever told you about. My former roommate from college, he's someone who's like, he's always going to be a friend for life. He lives in Long Island. He still lives with his folks. I go down there regularly to visit them. I would say twice, maybe 3 times a year. I'll drive down there and spend a couple of nights. His mother is like one of these people. She is like an extremely devout Christian. Like and there's not a negative thing you can say about this woman. And she's, and I've kind of coined this phrase, like, she's like one of the few people you meet who, like, you're sure that they're like a saint who walks the earth. And she was the one that was like, when I was going through all this stuff with my parents, she was the one that was reassuring me, like, Jeremy, what you're doing, this is like, all of God's commandments are obviously important, but, honoring thy mother and father, you are the absolute epitome of that right now. And that's like one of the most important commandments that any person can follow. And then she said, and for sticking with your parents through this, especially in this day and age. And she said, you're gonna be blessed for the rest of your life for doing this for them. Oh. So that was very comforting to hear that from her.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Yeah, and boy, do I agree. And do all of us who are listening, our hearts just did a little leap hearing that, because we know it's true. We know it's true. Jeremy, I know everyone is curious about your dad right now after hearing the story. Can you give us a little update? Obviously, his illness is one that progresses, which makes us nervous. What's your dad's story?
So he's definitely getting, I don't know how official it is, but he's kind of getting close to that later stage of Alzheimer's. He can verbally communicate, but there's a lot of deciphering that you have to do because he has a big tendency to ramble a lot, and when he talks, and I have to tell, because where he's at, because he's not. And I think I've mentioned this to you. He's not in Atria anymore. Last September, I moved him into a group home up in Rexford, which is just across the Mohawk River from Niskayuna. Yeah. So he's even further away. It's costing a lot more money than Atria did, but it's where he has to be right now. So yeah, like I said, he still can verbally communicate, and I tell staff there, I said, you have to not focus so much on the words, like, and because they have like this list of like, if he seems distressed by something, like they have like there's a list of questions that they ask, like, Jeff, do you need something to eat? Do you need something to drink? Do you need to use the bathroom? Do you have does anything hurt? Do you have any pain? All that. Like if he can't quite just come out with it, whatever's going on. So, and I tell people, if you're not understanding, like I said, if you're not able to really filter out all the rambling and the babbling that he does now, just like look at his expression. Is he motioning towards something? Is he holding part of his body a certain way? Or so, so like I said, communicating is a little bit tougher, but, his visual spatial problem, it's off the deep end. Like, it's, like, even, he can stand up on his own, but, like, if he tries to walk somewhere, he's completely directionless. Like, someone basically has to kind of, put their arm around him or take his arm or hold his hand and kind of walk him to where he needs to go. And but his long-term memory, though, I mean, there's still quite a bit of it that's there. Like, obviously, like when I'm there, he knows it's me. And I've brought over over the time, even going back to when he was at Atria, like I brought some of his friends up to see him. So, some people he's known since childhood. I think there was a person or two that he worked with for a long time, and every time it wouldn't happen immediately necessarily, but every time, like as soon as he heard their voice, it's like all right, he knows who it is. So which is good, and that's the thing that I would say. Anytime I run into someone in town here that knows me and knows my predicament, knows his predicament. Obviously, I always get, "How's your father? Have you seen your father lately? Are you able to see him during the pandemic?" And I always have to say, "Yeah, he's good. He's fine." I still have to kind of, we still have to kind of see each other through a glass door because I have to. They still can't let anybody in the house, but actually, as a matter of fact, in 2 days I've got a COVID test scheduled. So as long as that comes out negative, I can show them the results so they can bring him outside to me.
Oh.
And then we can actually sit down together for like the first time in ages.
Wow. Oh, I'm going to pray. I'm going to pray that all works out well. That sounds so important.
I am too, believe me. I got COVID tested a few weeks ago, and I'm not gonna name the place that I went to. It was out of town somewhere. The test itself went smooth. I never got the results. Never.
No kidding.
I called and emailed the patient support center. Never got an answer from them. So I'm never going to that place again.
Wow.
So this is COVID test take 2.
Oh, bummer. Oh, hey Jeremy, we're at the end of our time, but I don't want to let you go without asking a couple of questions that we ask of all the guests that come to share their story, and I think you're going to have some important perspectives just given what your life has been like and what your story has been like. So first of all, wow. Thank you for letting us go on that journey with you and for being so generous in letting us really see backstage. We can all hear that the
it's people say like, yeah, it's a little window into my world, and I guess this was more of a garage door into my world.
Oh, and a really blessed, privileged one. You really, you gave us a great gift in letting us see so fully.
And like I said, and this, I guess I'm talking to, both you, Father, and anyone that listens to this. It's not like, all this hardship that I talked about. It's not like I wake up and every single day has been like that. Like I've still been able to live like a somewhat normal life in between, all of these, negative events. Like I said, all this stuff from, when my mother first got sick and then my father got sick. We're talking, over the span of, 9 years, almost 10 years now.
Yes.
Yeah. So, like I said, there were a lot of, good times, kind of in between all that. And, like I said, I've still been able to live a normal life. It's just been a very, it's been a heavy burden. And so it's like I've been able to kind of shoulder that while trying to live my life normally.
Jeremy, a lot of people believe that everything happens for a reason. And other people say, no, that can't be true. Things just happen. What do you, thinking of your life, thinking about what you believe, what do you think about that? Does everything happen for a reason?
Well, and I kind of touched on it earlier in the conversation, like how, even with like the worst, events imaginable that have happened to people, innocent people, a lot of people that, that didn't deserve what they got, and everything else that goes on, even or a pandemic like this that's claimed a lot of lives, and it really, and then not even that, it cost people jobs and caused a lot of stress for people that that probably didn't have it coming. It's like maybe there's some things that happen for a reason. I can't really, confidently say that everything that happens in this world, good and bad, does it all have a reason? And I think I said before, are we meant to really know that in this life? Is it, I just I sort of like write it off as like, I think that's just part of God's infinite mystery. But I think in my own personal case here with what I've gone through with my parents, especially knowing that I'm an only child, so many of my relatives were scattered very geographically, scattered very distantly. I have some relatives that live close to town here, but I mean, it's really just been myself, my mother, and my father. We've really, just the three of us have only been really able to count on each other, and and a select few close friends, and volunteers that have helped us, immensely along the way. But yeah, maybe there was a reason why, this happened to my parents, especially at, such a pivotal point of me, in adolescence, entering adulthood. And now like I'm in post-college life, living on my own, which, I think that's real adulthood, when you're on your own and you're supporting yourself. Maybe it was all meant to just, like to test my will, or it was meant to make me as mentally strong as possible early in life.
Yes.
And I don't know, sometimes I think, well, was this all to kind of build up my mental fortitude for something that's going to happen further out in my life? I hope not.
Right.
That, what's gone on with me for the last so many years, that's about as much as I can take.
You're not looking for a bigger challenge, and who can blame you? Well, you know what? I'm curious. Speaking of challenges, the whole reason that I'm talking to you and the reason that this series exists is because coronavirus has been such a big challenge for everybody, and so many of our listeners have been met with situations and dilemmas they've never dreamed of before now. What is your hope of what can come about because of the challenge that we're going through? What are your best hopes for what life can be like after coronavirus is no longer such a big worry?
Well, the first thing I want to tell people, especially people that that really like legitimately worry, take a look at history. Back during World War I, this country had a really bad influenza pandemic or epidemic, and we got through it as a country. And we didn't have nearly the same medical technology that we have now, but we got through it. Not to mention, we got through a whole other world war after that. It's like this country has been through some stuff, and we cannot forget how resilient we are as a nation and as people. And I think, but to I guess to answer your question more directly, what I can hope for. I mean, I think everyone hopes that things can go back to normal, and no, I don't mean the new normal, because oh my God, I'm getting tired of that phrase. Even though we all have to suck it up and kind of cope with the new normal for now, but yeah, like obviously, I dream of a day when we don't have to wear masks everywhere, and we don't have to social distance everywhere. Hopefully, like I said, but history is showing. I think even I've heard from a couple people that actually back in the 1960s there was an epidemic of some kind of virus that happened, but it was so overshadowed by things like the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement and stuff like that it just I don't think it really got talked about so much, and we just kind of quietly got by it. So, like I said, we've done it before as a country, and it's. Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know. Maybe I'm looking at the too big of a picture, but maybe it's just history repeating itself again. But but I think not everything with this pandemic's been bad. It's brought out a lot of good. It's I think it's really is a firm reminder of how crucial healthcare workers and first responders are in any civilized society. To be, to really be the spine that we need to kind of hold everything together. So I definitely have to give props to all those people.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
And let me just now take a moment with our listeners to just ask, after listening, maybe you took more than one period of time to listen to this rich and lengthy conversation. What is staying with you? What is something that you heard Jeremy say that makes you want to look at your own relationships in a new way? That fourth commandment, thou shalt honor thy father and thy mother. What thoughts do you have about the blessings that come from following the fourth commandment, even when it's hard, and especially when it's hard? What are your hopes for the kind of resilience you'll be able to demonstrate when you face your next challenge? What is something that Jeremy said in this conversation that you want to bring with you to the next challenge that you face? Jeremy Tenenbaum, we are so grateful for the time you just took to open up the garage door of your life for us and to show so tenderly and beautifully and humbly and honestly what it is that has been happening in your life over these, especially past 10 years. We are so grateful for the way that you've lived your life in this community with your family. We're so grateful that we have you as a friend and a companion and a role model, and we ask that God will give us the same kind of strength that you've had when we face our next challenge. Jeremy, thank you so much for being with us.
You're very welcome, Father. And again, for anyone that listens to this, I said I appreciate your thoughts, and there's a lot of there's probably people in the community who I know personally that might be listening to this, and I just want to just say thank you for everyone that's always wished me well and have always prayed for me, and like I said, I truly do appreciate it, even though a lot of times I just kind of sometimes I might be a little bit aloof, and I'll just be like yeah, thanks, but I think I'm just I hear it so much from people, but I really do appreciate everybody's thoughts and prayers, and again, let's all keep on moving forward as people and as Christians, and I think that says it all there.
Yeah. Well, thank you, dear brother, and thank you to all of our listeners for joining us. May God bless you all.